Hello, I am Enigma, and today I'm going to be sharing my experience with 1P-LSD, a synthetic psychedelic compound which was available on the UK research chemical market before they brought in the psychoactive substance bill last year. Now, this experience occurred during the summer of 2015. It was a good time to take a compound like this. And at the time of the experience, I had some experience with psychedelic compounds. I tried 2CE, 2CI, which I was fortunate enough to come across at a party. Also psilocybin mushrooms, cannabis as well. No previous experience with 1P-LSD or LSD. This was my first time. Majority of this experience took place in my bedroom at my old house, which was in a rural setting, quite a good setting for LSD, I think. I'm reading from a trip report I wrote here. What I'm going to do is read it out and fill in a bit more of a flesh it out with some more details. Now, the trip began at 5:20 p.m. I had received a 100 UG 1P-LSD blotter, but due to having a very intense experience with psilocybin mushrooms a few weeks prior to this, in which I experienced ego death as a result of combining two psychedelics together, I decided it would be a good idea to just start with half a dose, since I wasn't familiar with LSD, and obviously I've read a lot of stories about people having very intense trips, and I didn't want to have a very intense trip my first time, so I dosed 50 UG to start with the intention of taking the other 50 UG if I felt I needed it, which of course I did. Now at 5:52 p.m, this is half an hour later, I was starting to notice some small visual changes, such as solid surfaces appearing to bend, but with no noticeable change in my headspace. And at 6:24 p.m, half an hour after this, still no further changes, so I decided to dose the remaining 50 UG. 6:38 p.m, about only 15 minutes later, colours were beginning to appear richer and far more vibrant, and at this point I became aware that it was beginning to work, and I felt quite excited. Half an hour after this, at 7:10, there was a noticeable emerging psychedelic headspace, visual distortions growing in intensity and complexity, and feeling almost a little claustrophobic from the intensity of the growing hallucinations. I thought it was time to go for a walk. Immediately upon leaving my house to go for a walk around the fields, I noticed that everything was becoming increasingly fractalized, especially organic matter. It was most noticeable, such as flowers, trees, grass. I was staring at these things for ages. Very enjoyable, very similar to psilocybin mushroom type fractal hallucinations as well. So that was around 7:55 p.m. Come about 8:30 p.m, I'd returned home. This is where the peak of my trip really began. It lasted approximately 3 hours. As I said before, in some respects the psychedelic headspace felt remarkably similar to that produced by psilocybin mushrooms, yet it was also distinct in and of itself, and decisively more mechanical in nature, I felt, than the organic psychedelics. Nonetheless, it provided insight and was consistently psychedelic, but something the peak did seem to lack was direction and purpose, which are two things my psilocybin mushroom trips have provided in ample amounts. I think now that perhaps the reason it seemed to lack direction and purpose is because I was lacking direction and purpose at the time. As we know, psychedelics amplify feelings, and I believe this is what was happening. It was just amplifying something that was already there. But because of this, I found myself kind of wandering around aimlessly, not really knowing what to focus my attention on, and I think this could be because the dose I took, I probably could have done with 150 UG, because at 100 UG, the headspace felt a little too heavy to really entertain other people or consider socialising, but it was also just a little too light, not quite immersive enough for me to get lost in the experience. As for the visual side of the experience, when I got home, it was consistently entertaining, but not. I wouldn't say it was mind blowing. At the time, I preferred the more realistic, bizarre type of hallucinations produced by substances like diphenhydramine. Don't ever go down that road. I was foolish pursuing that chemical for as long as I did. Fortunately, I can no longer use it due to developing a heart condition from abusing it. Nonetheless, I'm certain that had 1P-LSD been my first hallucinogenic experience, I would have been decidedly more impressed at the time. And in fact, when I think about it now, I am more impressed than I was at the time. It was a very novel compound, and I probably will do it again at some point in the future. I continue to observe the fractal patterns produced by 1P-LSD. They seem to change according to my thoughts, and I thought this was an effect which could become a lot more developed at higher doses and become very interactive too. All the patterns I saw, they were complex, beautiful, fractal, and seemed to appear just in front of my eyes and then be projected onto any surface which I observed. Occasionally I'd experience strabismus, and that meant I would see with perfect double vision, very reminiscent of dissociatives, but altogether different as well. When I closed my eyes, I could see the same patterns, but far more clearly, and it was easy to become engrossed for a short while, but this engrossment was limited to perceiving patterns only. No hypnagogic type scenarios, no dreamscape formulation or anything like that. Now, with my eyes closed, if I move my eyes up towards my third eye area in between your eyes, patterns would become even more clearer, colourful and vibrant, and this almost too much to focus in on, in fact. And this would be accompanied by bruxism and a sensation of neurons firing away in my brain, and this would immediately cease when I focus my eyes away from that area. Come 11:30 p.m, trip was starting to taper off, visuals becoming weaker, headspace gentler and dissipating. This would have been the perfect time to smoke some cannabis, I feel, but I didn't have any, and I don't think I'd like to have smoked it in the middle of the trip, because being sensitive to psychedelics, I could feel a very real potential for ego death. Even just with 1P-LSD by itself, I was kind of wrestling with some ego death type sensations, and I feel that if I'd smoked cannabis during the peak of the trip, as I did with psilocybin mushrooms, it would have produced a very similar ego death experience, which was not something I actually desired from this trip. Around 3:12 a.m. I fell asleep after taking 40 milligrams promethazine. The reason I took a sleep aid is because I felt noticeably stimulated after this trip, and not in an unpleasant way either, not like with amphetamines. And after this I had some incredible dreams, including one dream in which I had wings and I was flying around a game level. This is one of the most vivid dreams I've ever had. I still remember it to this day. Very enjoyable. 9 a.m. I woke up feeling mildly disorientated, a feeling which soon lifted away after I'd ate some food and went outside to get some fresh air. So that was my experience with 1P-LSD. I did have another experience afterwards where I took a whole 100 UG blotter in one. I'll be making another video about that experience, about the joys of staring into a mirror when you're on LSD. And after the experience, this is how I summarise it. I enjoyed it. It was every bit as powerful as my experience with psilocybin mushrooms, 2CE, 2CB. But I found it wasn't half as fun. It just seemed to lack the warmth of more organic compounds, and instead of providing a dialogue for the trip, it only seemed to offer a robotic monologue, and at times this made me feel disconnected from the experience. It felt a little more like a psychedelic plug-in enhancement than a spiritual teacher, in the sense that mushrooms are, mescaline is, but perhaps that's just me, perhaps that's just my personality. I did learn some things, of course. It wasn't void of insight, but the lesson structure seemed to lack guidance and direction, and I kind of felt like I was being taught by a machine. Because of this, I often found myself unable to relate to the compound or the experience. Now, some people might argue that. I'd say that is probably just a product of the headspace I was in at the time, even being sober. So that was my experience with 1P-LSD. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. I'm going to be making lots more videos discussing my experiences with drugs, including drug addiction as well. So if anyone's struggling with drug addiction, please subscribe. I have some videos about that. Leave me a comment as well. We can have fellowship. So yeah, please be safe whilst you're tripping, people. Always use Psychonaut Wiki and verify it with another source to make sure your dosages are right. You should always be testing your drugs as well. I have been incredibly silly in some of my ventures with drugs, and I'm only here to tell the story by the grace of God today. So yeah, please be safe, people. And if you need any help, if you're having a bad trip or anything like that, please check out Tripsit. It's a online drug safety awareness community. They have a chat room as well. You have to be over 18 to go on there, but if you're having a bad experience, there's some very friendly people there. I'm there as well. You should be able to find me on there too. So watch out for me, watch out for more videos, and be safe, people. This is Enigma saying peace out and God bless.